tell us about where you come from.
Okay, so I'm not going to tell you where I come from geographically. So I come from a town in Durban called Phoenix. So I'm originally from Phoenix. Actually, interesting story. I was born in Chatsworth, which is another town, and then moved to Phoenix when I was 1 year old. So I'm very well seasoned when it comes to coming from the hood. So yeah, so that's where I'm from, and I am the youngest from a family of four. I have three older brothers. As you
Sure.
can see, I'm Indian, so you can imagine the dynamic having three
Mm-hmm.
older brothers, being the youngest. I was lived a very sheltered life. I come from a really great family.
Yeah.
My parents are just incredible, and you know what, my earliest memory is of my dad being an entrepreneur. My dad has always been trying different things, always trying to do different things just to move the dial forward. And he wasn't very good at it, but he always tried. I think he was very good at
Mm.
always just getting back on the horse and figuring out what was the next thing. But he took care of us. We were a family of seven, actually, because it was my core
Sure.
family and my mom's mom who lived with us. So we had not the right size when it came to a house, not the right size when it came to a budget. But my dad made it happen. It was weird. It's like his willingness to take care of my grandmother just created this abundance in the house, and we just didn't know where it came from. So yeah, so that's where it all started, and it started on at 13 North Croft Drive, which was this very main road
Mm.
in the heart of Phoenix.
Yeah. Describe, the nature of Phoenix in KwaZulu-Natal as well as Chatsworth. You say that you're a thoroughbred hood girl. Talk to us about, what that dynamic is like, what the environment was like. Because, just to put it into context for those who may not know, but also to relate to those who come from the same, areas.
So I have to describe it in two different versions because the one I
Mm.
grew up in is very different from the one that's currently standing there today.
Yeah.
And I think growing up there, I didn't realize where I was because that was the world I was exposed to. I told you that we live in very financially constrained, in a constrained household. So we didn't travel a lot. We didn't go out a lot. I mean, funny story. When I look out from my house, there were houses on the horizon, and I thought the world ended there. And legit, I thought if we went any further, that was the end of the world.
Like Mufasa and Simba.
Yeah, pretty much. But I actually had such a limited concept of what the world was.
Mm.
And basically, that was my world. So whatever I was exposed to was the reality and the context that I had. And I'll tell you, like with key things, there was inconsistency around me. So there was just like some nice houses, some very basic houses, lots of like very heavily stacked infrastructure. I remember one day driving down a road and I asked my dad, how can two cars fit on this? And he said, no, it was not designed. In the Group Areas Act, they designed these for bicycles because when they put people into townships, they believed that the socio-economic state would be that
Would
people
never
wouldn't
provide for a car.
they would provide for a car. And people have evolved and there's so much of wealth and talent. You just mentioned with your dad, and the fact that you are busy crafting stuff, there's skills, people all around me. That's the one thing I remember. Everyone was hustling. That wasn't a word then when I was growing up, but
Yeah.
everyone was making a plan. And there was a lot of activity around me. I felt safe within that space, but it was actually a very unsafe space from the perspective that I don't think the structures worked back then the way it should have, or the way it worked everywhere else when it came to safety, when it came to the basic things that people actually are used to and take for granted in other segments of the population. Um, I say it that way because I was a child and I didn't really have much to compare to. But when I go back now, so
Mm.
my entire family's moved out. Everyone has come up as in for everyone's sake to Johannesburg. So we've moved up in its entirety. Even my parents have. But when I go back there and when I try to engage, number one, I find it very difficult to engage because I don't know how to reintegrate. Things have changed tremendously. So when we were put into these townships, like any other township, I think that's what's important. The mindset of apartheid and the mindset of how the township was supposed to be constructed infrastructurally was that there needed to be one access and two access points, one entry and one exit.
Yeah.
And everything in it was built for a period of time that would self-destruct. To my point on the single roads
Yeah.
for single car roads for two bicycles. So basically, the intention when these were constructed infrastructurally was for it not to last.
Limit progression.
Limit progression. So it's just like literally economically constricting. It's
Yeah.
designed with that in mind. So when you go back now, infrastructure is failing. It's really bad. Every single time I'm about to enter on Phoenix Highway, as you're coming from, interestingly enough, Amshlanga, from one like capital of like a lot of wealth, and as you're coming in, everything is just collapsing in front of you. 8 family flats, whatever that looks like, banks are collapsing. There's no the roads are not in a good quality, litter, whatever it may be. And as you go deeper, you can see the population has increased quite substantially. And so is everything else, right? People are progressing within the confines and the constraints. People are looking for opportunities. People are trying to access things. But the reality is that environment is just not sustainable. So infrastructurally and I think mentally, people haven't come out of that apartheid mindset because there's still that heavy access issue when you're looking at it. And till today, those are the main ways to enter. There's Phoenix Highway that runs through with one single entry and access point that's there. Yeah, just to come to it, I just think that people are still feeling very constrained by that mindset.
Yeah, I mean, my whole family comes from Durban. My dad comes from Stanger.
Okay.
My mom is from Mobeni Heights.
I'm learning so
Phoenix.
much about you today, so this is really great.
And my brother and my sister, they grew up in Durban. I had an auntie in Merebank, and they would, often spend time there.
Okay.
And then they had moved to Joburg just before I was born.
Okay.
So I've spent my whole life in Joburg, but my whole family, barring one or two super close relatives, are here in Joburg, right? And I think that it's something that I'm trying to work on, where I go back and I feel guilty.
Yeah.
And it's not that I am not doing whatever I can to, rise with people around me. That's very close to my heart, as it is yours.
Yeah.
And that is one of the areas that we, really
Definitely,
connected on. But I do feel, just sometimes overwhelming guilt because, some people are able to get out of their environments and situations regardless of what those are, and some just aren't. And I'll bring it back into a very recent example, which is, I say this with respect, but in a lot of cases when I've been in environments, specifically in the corporate world, in the working world, right? And I'm surrounded by other Indian females who come from that part of the country, KZN, Durban. There is a misalignment in terms of mindset, behaviors, characters, and just, I think, overall values. I mean, have you had similar experiences being, an Indian woman that comes from Durban and I being an Indian woman that comes from Joburg? And I just feel like, where does that come from, in your view?
Yeah.
Or am I just full of crap?
Listen, I can't speak on that point. So, no, I'm kidding. That's an interesting one. As you're speaking, I recall something. So, on this journey of coming to Swapvend that you mentioned that I founded, I had gone back to Phoenix to try and do a survey because I felt like it was important for me to go back. That overwhelming guilt you spoke about.
Yeah.
It's in me all the time, and it's not for me. It's a little bit of guilt, but it's also a responsibility that I felt that there was a reason I was planted there, and I needed to go back. So everyone's serving the major townships when it comes to trying to determine what are the solutions we need. So I decided, let me go back home, and I remember going through. And will you believe this? I went to 13 different places and no one wanted to do my survey.
Sure.
And it was Indian people who I grew up with. I even pointed, guys, I used to live there on 13
Sure.
North Park Drive. But every single, there were men, but almost every woman that I engaged with had this look on her face like, who do you think you are? So, like, what are you coming? The savior mentality that you have. But it was not at all that way. I really wanted to hear from people. So, that was an interesting thing which immediately came into my mind. But yes, I think to answer your question about those interactions and whether I've had them, yes, very much so. I thought it was just me. So it's good to hear. It might be a us problem.
Yeah, it might just be.
I'm keen to hear from anyone else if they've also had that issue. But I do think that it's various things. I think a lot of people, and again, I'm generalizing, so I stand to be corrected, but the people that I've engaged with, and I think in an extension in my family, I've seen it. There are two types of people: people who want that to define them. I've come from, like I said, I'm
Yeah.
from the hood. I like to tell people I'm from Phoenix. My mom often asks me, why do you always lead with that? Don't you feel like you've come out of it and you don't have to keep speaking about it? Whereas my brothers, and I really hope they don't watch this or listen to this, but they don't like to tell people where they've come from. And
Yeah.
it's not because of embarrassment. Maybe it is. I don't know, but I know them. And I just think,
Judgment.
yeah, it's judgment. And I think they were older than me, right? So
Yeah.
I spent less amount of time. So their exposure to it, the amount of time that they actually grew up during, like apartheid and the mentalities. And I'm sorry to keep taking it back there, but it's a reality that I think is still so alive. And I think a lot of people don't want to live within that context.
Yeah.
So there's some of them who are just like, I'm not about that life. I don't want to associate. And there's others who say that life brings up too much of like traumatic undertones, and I want to like redefine this. And I think Joburg has been like a cleansing ceremony for a lot of people. It's like the place you go to once you hit the N3 and you get out.
Yeah.
You get out,
Yeah.
and a lot of people don't come back, I suppose. Whatever that back looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this discussion, feel free to like our video and subscribe to our channel for more insightful conversations with founders and fintech pioneers. I also really like hearing from you guys, so if you have any questions, comments, or experiences, drop them in the comments below. Click here to watch the full episode, or click here to watch another.